My name is Maya, and I was born invisible. Invisible to the world, to opportunity, to luck. My earliest memories are of silence, cold walls, half-empty plates, and the sound of my mother coughing in the other room, pretending it wasn't getting worse. I grew up in a small, forgotten corner of the city, where broken dreams laid like scattered glass on the sidewalks, and everyone walked carefully, heads down. We didn't have much. Actually, we had nothing. My father had vanished when I was 3. My mother cleaned offices by night, and by day, I stayed with my little brother in a cramped one-room apartment. I never asked for toys. I asked for warm bread. But there was one thing I did have: language. While other kids played outside, I read anything I could find in garbage bins, libraries, even old magazines tossed in recycling bins. And once, by accident, I picked up a tattered German language children's book with a teddy bear on the cover. I didn't understand a word of it, but I was hypnotized. I started mimicking the sounds, repeating them, sounding them out phonetically, trying to figure out the code. Every day, I practiced German in secret. I watched online videos in stolen minutes on borrowed phones. I listened to podcasts while folding laundry. I memorized grammar books the way kids memorize songs. Nobody knew. Not my mother, not my teachers. Certainly, not the world, until that day. It was just another cold morning. I was wearing my oversized pink hoodie, the same one I'd worn for 3 winters. My shoes had holes in them. I was walking past a fancy cafe on my way back from the community library when I saw him, a man in a sharp navy blue suit, tapping away on his phone. He had the kind of polished presence that made people step aside, like he carried gravity with him. The plates on the table in front of him had untouched fruit and eggs, as if the food existed only for display. I didn't know who he was, only that he didn't belong to my world. And then I heard the phone ring in my pocket. Not my phone. I didn't even have one. It was a cheap Android my mother borrowed from her cleaning job, and I was just carrying it back to her shift. Someone was calling. The screen lit up. A number from Germany. I froze. Should I answer? What if it's a scam? But something told me, do it. I pressed the green button. "Hello?" I said, my accent instinctively falling into place. A man's voice responded rapidly in fluent German. He was in a panic. Something about a missed delivery, a contract error, an urgent document translation. I slipped into fluent German automatically, as if I was born in Berlin instead of this forgotten street. "Können Sie bitte langsamer sprechen?" I asked calmly. "Ich verstehe Sie, aber ich brauche einen Moment." The man on the line sighed with relief and continued. I translated some of his sentences in my head, gave a few reassurances, and told him I would pass on the message. I hung up the call, heart racing, and that's when I looked up. The man in the suit was staring at me. No, not staring, analyzing. His eyes sharp like a hawk. His coffee had gone cold. His mouth slightly open in shock, he stood up slowly and walked toward me. "Excuse me," he said in perfect English. "What did you just say? Was that German?" I nodded, suddenly nervous. "Do you speak German fluently?" "Yes," I whispered. He paused. "How old are you?" 12. His brow furrowed. "Where did you learn?" "Books, videos." I taught myself. He stared at me like I was a ghost, or a miracle, or both, and then he smiled, very slightly. "Would you mind waiting here for a minute?" I didn't know why I said yes. Maybe it was because no one ever looked at me that way, like I was more than just a poor girl in a broken hoodie. Like I mattered. He disappeared inside the cafe. I was just about to walk away when he returned, with 2 croissants and a hot cocoa. "For you," he said gently, handing me the food. I didn't know whether to cry or run. No one had ever given me food without asking for something in return. "What's your name?" he asked. "Maya." He held out his hand. "I'm Alexander Roth, CEO of Roth & Partners." I stared blankly. He laughed. You'll understand soon enough. That night, I told my mother everything. She didn't believe me, of course. She was too busy checking her temperature again, too exhausted from scrubbing office toilets to believe in fairy tales. But the next day he came back, this time in a black car, waiting outside the same cafe, and he wasn't alone. He brought a translator, a notary, and a woman from child services, though not the kind you'd expect. She wore a kind smile and called herself a social advocate for gifted children. Apparently, I was gifted. Apparently, someone had noticed. And just like that, my life changed. Over the next few weeks, Alexander Roth became a name I would never forget. He took me and my mother to proper doctors. He arranged schooling. He didn't adopt me. He said, I don't want to own your brilliance. I just want to make sure it's never ignored again. He gave me books in 7 languages. He gave me puzzles that bent my brain. And more than anything else, he gave me time, and time is where dreams are born. I learned that he had once been poor too. A street kid in Munich. His first business was selling handmade watches outside train stations. He taught himself English by translating Beatles lyrics. That day in the cafe, he told me, I saw myself in you, Maya. Only, you were braver than I ever was at your age. That's how the story begins. Not in a boardroom, not with millions. It started on a sidewalk, with a broken phone, a forgotten child, and a language not meant to be hers. But that was just the beginning. The call had changed everything, but I hadn't even begun to answer the bigger question, who was I meant to become? The first time I walked into the Roth & Partners headquarters, I thought I was trespassing into a movie set. Marble floors, glass elevators, digital panels showing real-time market updates in 5 languages. Everyone wore sleek suits and walked like time owed them something. And there I was, Maya, 12 years old, wearing my one clean hoodie, clutching my spiral notebook like it was a shield. Alexander Roth greeted me in the lobby himself. Welcome, he said, smiling like he had known me forever. Come on, I want to show you something. We went up to the top floor, where the walls weren't even walls. They were giant windows. You could see the entire city from up there. My heart thudded as he led me to a massive conference room, a long table, high-backed chairs, and one small chair, child-sized, placed at the end. For you, he said with a wink. He sat across from me and slid a folder across the table. What's this? I asked. He tapped the top gently. A future, or at least the doorway to one. I opened it. My eyes widened. It was an offer, a full scholarship. Not just to any school, a private international academy that trained kids in diplomacy, economics, languages, and technology. A place where future leaders were built, polished, and launched. It wasn't just about school fees. It covered housing, transportation, clothes, tutors, everything. My hands trembled. Why me? I whispered. There are so many smart kids. He folded his hands thoughtfully. Because when the world teaches you to stay silent, and you choose to speak anyway, in a language no one expected, you've already proved you can break barriers. The rest, he said, can be taught. But what you have? That's rare. I stared at the offer again, my chest tight. But I have my mother, I said, and my brother. I can't leave them. You won't, he said gently. We'll move them closer to the school. I'll make sure your mother gets the treatment she needs. And your brother? He'll have his own education plan, tailored just for him. I looked up sharply. You'd do that? He didn't blink. I already am. And that's when I realized this wasn't a test. It was a lifeline. The next month was a whirlwind. We moved into a modest but clean apartment just 10 minutes from the academy. My mother cried the first night. Not because she was sad, but because it was the first time in years she didn't have to sleep with the sound of dripping pipes. The the academy was another planet. Uniforms pressed so sharply, you could hear them rustle. Students with last names that appeared in newspapers. Kids fluent in French, Japanese, Mandarin. Some had private tutors since they were toddlers. They arrived in black. Town cars. I arrived on a city bus. I was an outsider in every sense. Poor, brown, from a broken home. But Alexander had told me something that stuck in my bones. Maya, you don't walk into a room hoping they'll accept you. You walk in knowing you already belong. The room just hasn't realized it yet. So I walked tall. I aced my German exams, then my French ones, then Latin, then business strategy, public speaking, ethics, and negotiation. By the end of the semester, the whispers stopped. Then came the nods. Then came the invites to group projects. I didn't blend in. I stood out, but not everything was perfect. There were still girls who laughed at my shoes, boys who snickered when they found out I didn't know what polo was. I ate lunch alone more often than not, until Theo. Theo came from old money, British accent, hair that looked like it belonged in a fashion ad. At first, I thought he was just another rich kid trying to impress himself in the mirror. But one day in debate class, he got paired with me, and we destroyed the competition. After that, he started sitting with me at lunch, asking questions, listening when I spoke. He was fascinated by my story, and I was fascinated by his humility. He wasn't like the others. One afternoon, as we sat under a tree in the academy courtyard, he asked, "Why do you push so hard?" I looked at him confused. "What do you mean?" "You already won. You got in. You got the scholarship. You have Mr. Roth in your corner. Most people would coast now." I thought about it. "I don't want to survive here," I said quietly. "I want to matter." Weeks turned into months. My mother got stronger. My little brother was thriving in his new school. He'd even started learning Spanish. And I started dreaming bigger. I wanted to become a diplomat, or a translator at the UN, or maybe start a company that bridged cultures through education. My thoughts were too large for sleep. Then one morning, I was summoned to Alexander Roth's office. I thought maybe I had done something wrong. But instead, he smiled the moment I walked in and said, "Maya, I have an offer for you." Again. He pulled out another folder. This one wasn't a scholarship. It was a contract. He wanted me to join Roth and Partners as a junior cultural strategist. I'd work part-time, helping with projects that required multilingual insights and cultural nuance. I could consult on real business proposals, sit in on executive meetings, shadow interpreters. I blinked. "But I'm 13. He chuckled. 13 going on 30. And besides, some people wait decades to find a mind like yours. But why now?" He leaned back. "Because I want you to learn business from the inside, not from a textbook. And you trust me?" "With a room full of billionaires," he said without hesitation. I said yes. Of course I did. That was the moment the world began to tilt in my favor. Every Friday, I rode the elevator up to the 27th floor of Roth & Partners, now with my own badge. I was given a small desk and a mentor who taught me how to read between cultural lines. I sat in boardrooms, watched billion-dollar decisions being made, and sometimes even got asked for my opinion. And when I gave it, they listened, not because I was loud, but because I was right. One day, I helped stop a $10 million branding mistake when I pointed out that a product name in Mandarin translated poorly in Vietnamese. The boardroom went silent. Alexander looked at me and said, "That just saved us 2 years of damage control." I was 13, still wearing hand-me-down blazers. But that day I walked home a little taller. Then came the gala. It was an annual Roth Foundation event, a black-tie evening where millionaires mingled and young scholars gave speeches. I was one of the scholars selected to speak, I wore a navy blue dress donated by the Academy's alumni committee. My hair was braided by my mother, her hands trembling with pride. As I walked onto that stage, I remembered standing on street corners, listening to foreign words on borrowed phones. I remembered hunger, cold, shame. Now, 1,000 eyes were on me, lights, cameras. I looked for Alexander in the crowd. He gave me a subtle nod, and I spoke, not just in English, but in 6 languages, one after the other. Each sentence a piece of my soul. Each word a thank you to every locked door I had ever picked. When I finished, the room erupted. They weren't applauding the speech. They were applauding the girl who answered a phone call in German. The morning after the gala, everything changed. Not in a dramatic firework kind of way, but in a quiet shift. Like when a door is slightly ajar and the light peeking through is just enough to change the entire room. Suddenly, people at school looked at me differently. The same students who used to whisper behind my back now offered nods of respect. Even the headmaster asked me to mentor new scholarship students. I was only 14, but they called me Miss Roth's protégé in the halls. But Alexander Roth never treated me like a trophy. He treated me like a partner. One afternoon he called me into his office. Not the glass-walled boardroom this time, but his private study, rich oak shelves, framed letters from presidents, a piano in the corner that looked untouched. He handed me a thick envelope sealed with wax. I opened it slowly. Inside was a plane. Ticket, first class, one way, destination, Zurich, Switzerland. I stared at it, confused. I don't understand. He leaned forward, his fingers steepled. I'm sending you on your first mission. Mission? I laughed nervously. I'm 14 and brilliant, fluent in 5 languages. You've read more international case law than half my legal team. This isn't a vacation, Maya. It's a challenge. My mouth went dry. Why Zurich? He opened a drawer and slid out a file. Inside were reports, photos, and transcripts. There's a multinational tech firm, Hollenbach and Virel. They're trying to expand into the Middle East and Southeast Asia, but their marketing keeps failing. Offending people even. He tapped a photo of a campaign billboard written in 3 different dialects, badly. I want you to observe their team, attend their open investor event, blend in, watch, listen, and tell me, why are they failing? What are they missing? I blinked. You're sending me to spy? Ooh. He chuckled. To study. Discreetly. And I'll go alone? No. He smiled. You'll be accompanied by someone you already know. That someone was Theo. When I saw him at the airport, dressed in tailored navy and holding 2 passports, I nearly dropped my boarding pass. You? I whispered. Surprised? He grinned. Stunned. He nudged my shoulder. You didn't think I'd let you steal all the glory, did you? The flight was surreal. Warm towels, whispered menus. Flight attendants who spoke 3 languages. We sat side by side, reviewing documents and sipping sparkling water like seasoned diplomats. In Zurich, everything was silver and still. The buildings looked like they'd been cleaned with diamonds. Our hotel suite was larger than my family's entire apartment. But there was no time to gawk. The Hollenbach and Virel open event was already underway. I dressed in a black blazer and tied my hair in a neat bun, trying to look older. More serious. Theo briefed me on the plan. We blend in, watch how the executives present, how the locals react. We take notes. It felt like something out of a movie. Inside the venue, glossy digital screens displayed the company's newest ad campaigns. Flyers were printed in multiple languages, but the phrasing was odd. Some of it downright offensive. A poster aimed at Indonesian consumers used idioms that, when translated, were deeply inappropriate. Another campaign targeting Gulf investors had completely missed the cultural etiquette. It showed women shaking hands with male executives in ways that would be frowned upon. I took notes furiously. Theo snapped photos discreetly. Then, I noticed something else. There were no interpreters on the floor, no multilingual staff assisting confused guests. A German businessman whispered to a Korean delegate, who shook his head, lost. An Emirati guest tried to ask a question in Arabic and was ignored. Theo leaned close. They didn't invest in people, just automation. I nodded. They built a machine and forgot the soul. That night, I compiled a full report. It was 16 pages long. Didn't just list their errors, I proposed solutions. Language specialists, cultural consultants, partnerships with local NGOs, respectful media messaging, even etiquette training for their C-suite. Theo read the report twice. Then he looked at me and said, "You don't belong in school, Maya. You belong at the table." When we returned, Alexander greeted us at the airport himself. I handed him the report. He read the first page. By the time he reached the third, he smiled. "This," he said, "will save them millions." "But they're not your clients," I said. "They will be," he replied, dialing his phone. From that day on, I wasn't just a student, I was a consultant. At 14, I helped with pitches to global clients. I trained executives on cultural nuance. I gave speeches at economic forums where I wasn't even legally allowed to sign contracts yet. But people listened because Alexander Roth stood beside me, and because my voice, once doubted, once dismissed, was now shaping boardroom decisions. Wasn't just the girl who answered a German phone call anymore. I was the girl who rewrote the rules. One evening, Alexander invited me to dinner, not a business dinner, but something quieter. Just the two of us. A rooftop restaurant overlooking the city skyline. "You've done more in 2 years than most adults do in 10, he said, pouring tea into delicate cups. "But I need to ask you something important." I nodded. "If I died tomorrow," he said suddenly, "would you continue?" The question startled me. He clarified. "Would you continue this work, this vision, helping others like you once were?" I swallowed hard. "Of course. But you're not going anywhere, are you?" He gave a small smile. "Life is unpredictable. I need to know this movement doesn't end with me, that it lives through someone who remembers where it began." "I remember every moment," I whispered. "Good," he said, "because it's time." "Time for what?" He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside wasn't jewelry. It was a golden pin shaped like a flame. Every generation I choose one person to carry the flame forward. Someone who rose from nothing, who saw through lies, who listened before they spoke. Someone who became more than their past. He pinned it to my lapel. I felt its weight, and I understood. This was more than mentorship. It was legacy. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my balcony, the city lights twinkling below me, the pin still on my jacket. My phone buzzed. It was Theo. "Theo. Still up?" "Me. Yeah, Theo. Crazy, isn't it? Everything?" "Me. It's not crazy. It's a beginning." There was a pause. "Theo. You think one day you'll run Roth & Partners?" I stared at the stars for a long moment. Then I typed, "Me. Not. Just run it. I'll change it. From the inside out." And for the first time, I truly believed it. Because the invitation wasn't just to Zurich, it was to a different life. One where a poor girl with a sharp mind and a love for languages could become a woman who didn't just interpret the world, she transformed it. By the time I turned 17, I was no longer just a student under scholarship. I was an equity partner in Roth & Partners. It didn't happen overnight. It was years of silent effort. Mornings spent translating investor calls, nights rewriting, corporate manuals, weekends training teams for global expansions. I never once asked for recognition. I just worked. And quietly, Alexander began to shift pieces behind the scenes. He added my name to boardroom slides, introduced me to CEOs, not as his intern, but as his strategic advisor. Eventually, he handed me my first solo project, Restructuring, a floundering African textile startup with massive potential, but a tangled web of corrupt distributors and unpaid debts. I traveled alone to Nairobi, sat in circles with factory workers and listened more than I spoke, ate with the team in their cafeteria, touched the threads with my own fingers. By the time I returned, I had a plan. It wasn't flashy, but it was honest. Alexander read my proposal and just nodded. "You didn't save a company," he said. "You restored its dignity." And that was the moment I knew this was never about business. It was about people. Around that time, Alexander fell ill. He never made a show of it. He still wore his sharp suits and gave powerful speeches, but I noticed the way his hands trembled when he signed papers, the way he lingered in silence after long meetings. One afternoon, he summoned me to his office. "I'm stepping back," he said simply. "Doctors insist." My throat clenched. "Is it?" He waved it off. "It's not goodbye. It's transition. And I want you to take the reins." I froze. "You mean now?" He nodded. "You're ready." The boardroom disagreed. They called it impulsive, dangerous, a bold overreach. "She's 17, one executive hissed. "What will the media say?" Alexander just smiled. "They'll say I was the only one who saw what was coming." And then, in front of everyone, he stood and declared, "Effective immediately." Maya Alvi is co-director of global operations. Anyone who has a problem with it, resign. Silence. Then a slow ripple of stunned nods. And just like that, I was at the helm. I didn't try to imitate Alexander. I led my own way. I replaced leather chairs with community tables, created a rotating youth board of thinkers under 25, rewrote our pitch decks to include impact metrics, not just profit projections. Most importantly, I returned to the places no one wanted to invest in. I went to Dhaka, Bogota, Manila, rural Romania. I sat with broken companies and listened to the stories behind their collapse, not to punish them, to rebuild them. One project at a time, I earned my reputation not as the girl with the pin, but the fixer of the forgotten. But success has a cost, and mine came one rainy Thursday in Prague. I was giving a keynote speech at a global innovation summit. Packed room, journalists, cameras, lights. I wore a crisp cream suit and heels that pinched, but I walked that stage like I owned. At halfway through my speech, a voice shouted from the back, "You're just a charity case that got lucky." The room fell silent. I froze. Then I set down my cue cards, walked to the edge of the stage, and said calmly into the mic, "Yes, I was a charity case. I lived in a flat with no heat. I shared one pair of shoes with my sister. I ate rice and beans for dinner 6 nights a week. But luck didn't get me here. Discipline did. Kindness did. One man's belief in a broken girl did. And if you still think that makes me unqualified, then I invite you, not to debate me, but to come with me. To the factories, the farms, the schools, and tell them I don't belong." The crowd stood, not out of pity, out of truth. Back in New York, Alexander was waiting. He was thinner now, slower, but his eyes still sparkled. "I saw the footage," he said. "You didn't flinch." "I almost did." He chuckled. "That's the secret. We all almost do. But then we remember why we started." He handed me an old leather folder. Inside were dozens of letters. Each one was a story, written by scholarship students, rescued entrepreneurs, single mothers who got their business back, kids who got shoes because Roth and Partners quietly funded factories that didn't exploit Dati. The bottom of the pile was a single envelope with my name, his handwriting. I opened it with trembling fingers. "Maya, I knew from the moment you picked up that phone, you'd change everything. Not just because you're brilliant, but because you're brave. One day you'll forget what it felt like to be invisible. But never forget the millions who still are. Don't just lead them, see them. Speak the words they cannot. build the bridges they've only dreamed of. And when the world tells you you're too young, too poor, too foreign, smile, because they haven't met a fire like you. Carry the flame, always. Alexander. I wept for hours that night, not out of sadness, but because for the first time, I felt the full weight of the legacy he had placed on my shoulders, and I was ready to carry it. A month later, I stood in front of the board. I was 18 now, and I proposed something radical. We're not just a consulting firm anymore, I said. We're becoming a movement. They stared. I clicked to the next slide. Roth Foundation for Emerging Voices. A new branch, a new mission. We'd invest in ideas from invisible places, not with charity, but with equity, with dignity. We'll find the next Maya, I said, before she ever picks up that phone. The board voted unanimously. Today, I stand on stages in Dubai and Davos. I walk through airports where strangers thank me for changing their towns, their startups, their lives. But I never forget where it began. A hallway, a ringing phone, a language only I understood, and a man who saw a future in a girl the world had forgotten. I still keep that golden flame pin in my jacket pocket, worn from years of travel, warm from the fire it carries. Because long after Alexander Roth passed, away, his vision still walks beside me. And one day, I'll pass the flame too, to the next girl, the quiet one in the corner, the janitor's daughter, the immigrant child with a mind that burns like the sun. And I'll whisper what he whispered. To me, the world isn't waiting for you to belong, it's waiting for you to change it. I was barely 19 when the call came in. It was 3:14 a.m. I had fallen asleep on a couch in my New York office, buried under spreadsheets, contracts, and one half-eaten croissant. My assistant, Ava, shook me awake, phone in hand, eyes wide. It's Zurich, line 2. Zurich? I blinked sleep away and pressed the receiver to my ear. A familiar voice crackled through. You once answered a call in German, Maya. Now it's your turn to listen to one in silence. It was Klaus Heller, the CEO of Heltech, one of the world's most controversial AI firms. Secretive, elusive, ruthless. And suddenly, reaching out to me. He didn't waste words. I've followed your work. The textile revival in Lagos, the youth banking initiative in Bogota, your turnaround of the Greek solar cooperative. A pause. I have an offer. I sat up straighter. What kind of offer? He told me. And my heart stopped. Heltech was on the brink of a catastrophic collapse. Regulatory. Probes, whistleblowers, tech leaks. They were hemorrhaging credibility and about to be dismantled by the European Ethics Committee. Klaus didn't want a lawyer. He didn't want a spin doctor. He wanted me to rebuild Heltech from the inside, clean it, rewire it, give it a conscience. If you say yes, he said, you'll be the youngest executive in our company's history. You'll have 90 days, fix it, or walk away. It was insane. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Everyone told me not to do it. Alexander's old advisors said it was a trap. My new board members warned it would tarnish everything I'd built. But deep down, I knew. This wasn't just another company. This was the future. The bleeding edge of AI, automation, and human-machine ethics. If I could fix this, I wouldn't just be changing business, I'd be shaping history. I packed one bag, boarded a red-eye to Zurich, and by sunrise, I was in a frosted glass conference. Room with 10 lawyers, a furious PR team, and Klaus Heller himself. He slid a document across the table. Here's everything. I opened it. One clause stood out. Executive Power Clause. Full operational authority to Maya Alvi. Effective immediately. No oversight for 90 days. He was serious. I signed. The first 48 hours were brutal. I discovered surveillance programs masked as user enhancements. an entire team of whistleblowers in legal limbo, an internal culture of quiet cruelty, brilliant minds, terrified to speak. So I did what no one expected. I opened every door, transparency dashboards, anonymous employee polls. I sat with coders, janitors, HR clerks, and security guards. I listened, and I learned. These people didn't want to destroy the world. They just wanted to create something meaningful and not lose their jobs doing it. Day 17. Shut down Project Leviathan, an algorithm that profiled users in real time for predictive trust scoring. It had the potential to prevent crime, but also destroy freedom. The backlash was instant. Klaus confronted me. "You killed $1 billion prototype." I stood tall. "I saved you from $1 billion scandal." He didn't smile, but he nodded. Day 29. We launched Project Mirror, an AI that didn't just learn, but reflected ethical frameworks based on user communities. It asked, "What would justice look like if you defined it?" Not in data, but in values. Suddenly, the narrative began to shift. The media no longer called me the girl with a halo and a hammer. They called me the architect of trust. By day 60, investors were trickling back in. By day 80, the ethics committee lifted their sanctions, and by day 90, Klaus Heller offered me something unthinkable. Name your price. I could have said anything. 10 million, 50, a private island. But I smiled and said, ownership. I want a seat at the table. And 10% of everything we build from here forward goes into the Alvi Fund for ethical tech in emerging nations. He laughed. You're dangerous. No, I said. I'm just getting started. I returned to New York with more than stock options. I returned with a mission. The world didn't need more billionaires in suits. It needed builders of bridges. So I expanded the Roth Foundation into something global. Echo, a mentorship program. Pairing retired engineers with teenage girls in underserved villages. Pulse, a real-time translation earpiece made affordable and sold at cost, inspired by the moment that changed my life. Lighthouse Labs, tech hubs in conflict zones, offering tools for refugees to learn, build, and lead. And I did it all without losing myself. Because every time I walked into a boardroom, I saw the old me, the little girl in the janitor's uniform, the one who never asked to be seen, but just once, needed someone to believe in her. Years passed, and one day, while visiting a school in Jakarta, a young girl handed me a note written in halting German. It read, "I heard you speak once, I learned your language, and now, I'm learning to lead." Cried right there in the courtyard. Because that was it, wasn't it? The circle, the echo, the fire passed forward. People ask me what the turning point of my career was. They expect me to say Zurich, or Davos, or that night the UN invited me to speak, under the dome of stars. But honestly, it was that hallway, that crackling phone, that voice calling out in a language no one else understood. That moment I said, "Hello, wie kann ich helfen?" Because sometimes a billion-dollar story doesn't begin with a boardroom. It begins with a choice to answer, to step forward, to believe that even the smallest voice can carry across oceans. The helicopter blades slowed overhead as we descended onto the sun-drenched rooftop of the Berlin Convention Center. 10 years had passed since I answered that fateful phone call in German, and today, the girl no one noticed in a janitor's uniform was being honored with the Global Humanitarian Technology Award. Not because I was a billionaire, but because I'd used everything I had to lift others who felt invisible, like I once did. As I stepped up to the podium, the crowd fell into reverent silence. But I didn't begin with numbers, or projects, or billion-dollar milestones. I began with her. Once I was a girl cleaning floors. I spoke 5 languages, but no one asked my name, until one moment, one phone call, one choice to speak up. I looked into the sea of faces, Young coders, scholars, dreamers from every corner of the globe. I'm not standing here because I was the smartest in the room. I'm standing here because I refused to stay silent, and because someone gave me a chance when no one else did. They rose to their feet, but even as the applause echoed through the hall, my heart wasn't in Berlin, it was home. Later that night, I returned to the city where it all began. I didn't fly in by jet or limo. I took a regular cab because some places deserve to be revisited as you were, not as who you've become. I stood outside that same hotel where I had once scrubbed floors and emptied bins. The marble tiles still shone. The golden arch still hung above the revolving doors. But when I walked in, the doorman paused. His eyes widened. "Miss Alvi?" he stammered. You used to..." I smiled. "Yes, I did." He blinked in disbelief. "What brings you back?" "Here?" I looked around. Gratitude. I walked past the front desk, past the service elevator, and into the maintenance corridor. And there, still hung neatly, was the staff photo from 10 years ago. There I was, top left corner, wearing a faded uniform, holding a mop, my eyes tired, but still burning. It took everything in me not to cry. I asked the manager if I could speak to the night staff. He gathered them in the break room, just like we used to huddle on cold shifts. I looked at the new faces, young, tired, hopeful. They reminded me of me. I cleared my throat and said, "I used to sit where you're sitting. I used to count coins just to afford bread. I used to pray someone, anyone would see me." A girl in the back raised her hand. "How did you go from here?" "To there," I smiled. I stopped believing I was just anything. Just a cleaner, just a girl, just poor. I decided I was more. That night I left them with envelopes. Inside each, a scholarship, a mentorship offer, and a handwritten note. "You matter. The world just hasn't caught up to your light yet." Next morning, I boarded a plane to Nairobi. It was time to visit the Echo Center, our flagship tech hub for girls displaced by conflict. As I walked through the gates, 300 girls in colorful hijabs and vibrant smiles rushed toward me. They called me Mama Maya. We toured their coding rooms, drone labs, and solar-powered greenhouses. One girl, Layla, showed me her prototype, a water purification sensor built from recycled radio parts. She was 12. I asked her, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" She didn't blink. "A builder of empires," I grinned. "That's exactly what I see." That afternoon, I held a private mentorship session with the 10 oldest girls. We sat cross-legged on the floor. I asked each one, "What's your greatest fear?" One said, "That I'll never leave this village." Another whispered, "That my ideas will die with me." I told them this: your mind is your passport, your will is your engine. No border, no blockade, no billionaire can stop a girl who knows her worth. They looked at me like I was made of gold, but I reminded them, I was forged in dust, and so were diamonds. On the flight home, I stared out the window at the stars, and I realized something. Success isn't a tower you climb alone. It's a bridge you build behind you, so others can rise too. That's why I never bought a mansion. I built schools. That's why I didn't hoard yachts. I funded clean water projects. That's why I refused every offer to write a tell-all book for millions. Because some stories aren't meant to be sold. They're meant to be lived and shared freely. Years passed. My name appeared on billionaire lists, headlines, and awards I'd never dreamed of. But the moment I cherished most, it came quietly. One winter morning, I was walking through Central Park when a young woman approached me. She wore a waiter's apron. Her hands were rough, her eyes tired, but bright. She said, "Miss Alvi, you don't know me, but when I was 16, my school received your translation devices. It helped me learn 6 languages. I just passed the UN interpreter exam." I hugged her, hard, and whispered, "The world needs your voice. Use it well." Today, I no longer chase success. I invest in significance. I sit on global boards, yes. But I also sit on dirt floors in Uganda, learning from girls with fire in their bellies. I give lectures at Harvard, but I also give time to teenagers who think, no one sees them. I've made billions, but I've given away more than I've kept, because legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you ignite in others. And now, as I write this, I think back to that hallway, that mop bucket, that strange phone ringing, that simple word, hello. It was the beginning of everything, and the proof that one act of courage, one moment of stepping forward, can rewrite your entire future. If you're out there right now, lost, tired, overlooked, listen closely. Your moment is coming. It might look like a small chance. It might arrive when you're exhausted, invisible, or afraid. But when it comes, answer. Because even a whisper can start a revolution.